He went out to buy bread. That is the detail that stays with you when you learn the story of Jonas Lucas Alves Dias. Not the 47 million reais, not the years of investigation, not the courtroom drama, the bread. He left his modest home in the Jardim Rosolem neighborhood of Hortolândia, in the interior of São Paulo, on a quiet Tuesday morning in September of 2022, walking to the corner bakery the way he always did, the way he had probably done thousands of times before he ever held a winning lottery ticket in his hands. His sister was home. He was bringing something back for her. He never came back. This is the story of a man who won the dream and refused to let it change him, and of how that refusal, rooted in something deeply human and entirely understandable, made him a target. This is the story of Jonas Lucas Alves Dias, known in his community simply as Luquinha, and of the organized criminal network that hunted him, tortured him over 20 hours of captivity, and left him dying on the side of a highway. This is the story of what happened when enormous, sudden wealth met the complete absence of protection. My name is Harrison Cross, and this is the Blackout Tapes. To understand Jonas Lucas, you have to understand who he was before September of 2020. For most of his adult life, Jonas Lucas worked as a security guard, a vigia, a watchman. It is not a glamorous profession in Brazil. It is the kind of work you take because it pays reliably, because the schedule is predictable, because it keeps a roof over your head. Jonas was 53 years old when he won the Mega-Sena lottery. He had spent decades in that routine. He shared a house with his sister and his older brother, who was 65 at the time. They were a tight family, the three of them, living simply, living close. Then the numbers came up. The prize was 47,100,000 reais, net after taxes. In any currency, at any conversion rate, that is a number that changes everything. For a former security guard in the interior of São Paulo, it was a transformation so complete it would have been difficult even to fully comprehend. Tens of millions. More money than most people see in several lifetimes. And Jonas Lucas, by every account from every person who knew him, tried very hard to remain himself. He stayed in his house in Jardim Rosolem. He kept walking to the bakery in the morning. He kept the same friends, the same routines, the same unpretentious way of moving through the world. His neighbor and longtime friend, São Francisco, would later describe with visible emotion the fishing trips to the chácara Jonas had bought. 10,000 square meters of rural property valued at over 800,000 reais, which became his sanctuary, a place where he organized barbecues and gathered the people he loved. That was Jonas. He finally had money, and what he wanted to do with it was go fishing with his friends. There is something deeply moving about that. There is also something that, in retrospect, makes you want to reach through time and beg him to be more careful. Because Jonas was not exactly hiding his wealth. He could not, really. He bought that country property. He invested 1 million reais in a tool company alongside 3 friends he had known since 1994, a partnership of old colleagues finally going into business together. He bought vehicles, jeeps and utility cars, and he gave constantly and generously in the way of someone who had never had much and suddenly had everything. He reportedly gave a truck worth 450,000 reais to a childhood friend. He lent money without interest to another acquaintance so the man could buy a house. He regularly purchased expensive medications for an older friend, a 68-year-old former colleague from his security guard days who had been diagnosed with cancer and could not afford the treatment on his own. Jonas Lucas knew what it was to need help, and now he could give it. The lead investigator at the Hortolândia precinct, João Jorge Ferreira da Silva, put it plainly when speaking to the press. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Jonas had money. Not how much exactly, but enough. Jane Ferreira, 36 years old, a local resident who knew Jonas from the community, summed it up in a way that carries the weight of everything that followed. Everyone thought it was dangerous for him to walk around alone with a story so well known as having won the lottery. Everyone thought it was dangerous. And still Jonas walked. Still, he went to the bakery. He had been warned. Friends had told him more than once to change his address, to change his routine, to put some distance between himself and his old life. He rejected the advice. His position was, in essence, that he was a good person who had lived honestly in this neighborhood for years, and that no one would harm him here. He believed, with what seems like both sincerity and a kind of terrible naivety, that his simplicity protected him, that staying humble was the same as staying safe. Criminologists have a name for this kind of thinking. They call it the dissonance between sudden wealth and habitual vulnerability. When someone moves from one economic reality into another dramatically different one, the psychology does not always keep pace. The behaviors and beliefs that made sense in one context persist in another, where they carry entirely different risks. Jonas Lucas was a kind, generous man who genuinely did not want to become someone else. That desire was admirable. In the environment he inhabited after the lottery win, it was also fatal. The morning of September 13th, 2022 was a Tuesday. Jonas left the house around 6:30 in the morning. He walked to the bakery, bought fresh bread, the kind you bring home for the people you live with, a small domestic gesture, and somewhere in the vicinity of that ordinary errand, the world turned. A Chevrolet S10 pickup truck and a black Ford Fiesta had been positioned in the area. Security camera footage later captured what happened. A synchronized approach, multiple men, and Jonas Lucas being forced into the pickup truck with overwhelming physical violence. No opportunity to resist, no warning. The man at the wheel of the S10 was Marcos Vinicius Sales de Oliveira, 22 years old, known to his associates as Vini, who had prior convictions for fraud and receiving stolen goods and had been released from prison the previous September. What followed were approximately 20 hours of captivity. 20 hours. The investigators from the Divisão Especializada de Investigações Criminais, the DEIC, based in Piracicaba, and the local precinct in Hortolândia would piece together, through banking records, security camera footage, phone records, and digital forensics, what those 20 hours looked like. The picture is brutal. Jonas Lucas, 55 years old, a man who went to the bakery every morning, was subjected to sustained physical torture. The kidnappers were not interested in negotiating a ransom with his family. Their method was more direct and more savage. They wanted his money, and they wanted it through him, directly, using his body and his access credentials and his voice. They beat him. They demanded passwords. They demanded bank access. They demanded he communicate with his bank manager on their behalf. At some point during those 20 hours, still alive and under coercion, Jonas Lucas sent voice messages on WhatsApp to his account manager at the bank. The recordings, obtained during the investigation, are haunting in what they reveal about his condition. Under clear instruction from the kidnappers, Jonas attempted to construct a plausible story about needing to finalize the purchase of a rural property. Hasn't the confirmation come through? Can you speed this up for me? And then, maintaining the fabricated narrative. I'm here at the farm. I need to close this today. 3 million reais. That was what they wanted transferred. The kidnappers, through Jonas, were attempting to drain 3 million reais in a single remote transaction. The bank said no. The account manager flagged the request immediately. Under the financial compliance protocols designed to combat money laundering and financial fraud, a remote transfer of that magnitude was categorized as anomalous, entirely out of keeping with normal transaction patterns and impossible to authorize without the physical presence of the account holder. The delegate Juliana Ricci, heading the DEI investigation, later described the bank's decision in precise terms. The transfer was denied because it was of an unreal value, completely inconsistent with the client's standard financial behavior, and the bank's internal procedures mandated in-person verification before any such sum could move. And here is the terrible paradox that sits at the heart of this case, the detail that you cannot stop turning over. The bank's refusal saved Jonas's inheritance. It protected his money, protected his siblings' future, protected the fortune from being stripped entirely by the men who held him. The compliance system worked exactly as it was designed to work. But for Jonas Lucas himself, that moment, the moment the transfer was denied, was the moment his usefulness to his captors ended. A kidnapper who cannot get what he wants from a living victim has only one calculation left to make. There was a second financial operation running in parallel, smaller in scale, ugly in its precision. While Jonas remained held somewhere out of sight, Marcos Vinicius drove the black Ford Fiesta to a Caixa Econômica federal branch in Campinas. Security cameras inside the bank captured him clearly. He activated banking applications on a mobile device using credentials and biometric data extracted under torture from Jonas. He withdrew cash, 2 withdrawals of 1,000 reais each at ATMs, and he completed a PIX transfer of 18,600 reais to a bank account held in the name of Rebecca Messias Pereira Batista, 24 years old, who investigators would later determine had been recruited as a financial cutout, a so-called laranja, by another member of the group. Rebecca, according to the defense narrative offered later in court proceedings, was a young woman in a state of extreme social vulnerability, living on the streets, who had been approached by the man investigators identified as the network's recruiter and offered what she was told was an opportunity to participate in light fraud. She provided her documents, her account, her identity. The defense would argue she had no knowledge of a kidnapping. The prosecution would argue that everyone in the chain bore shared responsibility for what that kidnapping produced. The recruiter was Roberto Jefferson da Silva, 38 years old, known by the nicknames Gordo or Gordome. He was, in the investigators' assessment, the organizational nerve center of the operation's logistical periphery. The man who identified and enrolled vulnerable people, who coordinated the movement of the support vehicle, who was present when funds were collected. Notably, Roberto Jefferson had no prior criminal record before this case. He was not a career criminal in the traditional sense. He was someone who had constructed a support infrastructure around men who were. The fifth member of the group was Rogério de Almeida Spinola, 48 years old, who had served 15 continuous years in prison before being released in December of 2021, less than a year before the kidnapping. He operated in Roberto Jefferson's orbit, providing auxiliary logistical support. His defense would later attempt to portray him as a peripheral figure. The prosecution would reject that framing entirely. 5 people, each with a role, each a link in a chain that ended with Jonas Lucas left on the asphalt of the Rodovia dos Bandeirantes at 4:30 in the morning on September 14th. The highway is a major interstate artery in the state of São Paulo. The Bandeirantes, named for the colonial-era explorers who opened up the Brazilian interior. It runs from the capital toward Campinas and beyond, passing through the flat agricultural heartland of the state. At kilometer 104 on the southbound lane, near an access ramp connecting to the SP 101 State Road, still within the jurisdictional limits of Hortolândia, the kidnappers slowed their vehicle and left Jonas on the ground. He was found by motorists. He was completely unconscious. The state of his body documented what 20 hours of sustained physical assault does to a 55-year-old man. Paramedics from the Autobahn Highway concession responded and initiated advanced life support protocols. He was transferred urgently to the Hospital Municipal Governador Mario Covas. He died hours later. The Forensic Institute's report listed the cause of death as severe traumatic brain injury. They had beaten him to death. Not quickly, not in a moment of violence that escaped control, but over the course of an entire night, methodically, in the service of extracting access to a fortune that the bank's compliance system ultimately blocked. The sister who had been waiting for him that Tuesday morning, who had last seen him as he left to get bread, who had perhaps looked toward the door expecting him to return, learned that her brother was gone. The older brother, 65 years old. The family that had lived together simply and happily in the Jardim Rosolim house. The investigation moved with striking speed. The digital trails were extensive. The pics transferred to Rebecca's account was traceable with precision. The sending device, the routing, the timestamp, all of it documented in the Banco Central's transaction logs. The security camera footage from the Caixa Econômica Federal branch in Campinas had captured Marcos Vinicius's face. On the afternoon of September 14th, the same day Jonas died, cameras at a bank branch in Santa Bárbara do Oeste filmed Roberto Jefferson and Rebecca Messias attempting further transactions. The arrests followed. Rogério Spínola was apprehended. Rebecca was detained by municipal guards in Santa Bárbara do Oeste. Marcos Vinicius Ferreira, the 22-year-old who had loaned the black Ford Fiesta to the group, a vehicle registered in his mother's name, was arrested in Campinas on a separate charge: illegal possession of a firearm with its serial number removed, a tactical arrest timed around electoral period restrictions that allowed investigators to detain him immediately while building the kidnapping case. Roberto Jefferson, on September 23rd, walked into the D.C. offices in Piracicaba, accompanied by his lawyers, and surrendered voluntarily. Marcos Vinicius Sales de Oliveira, Vini, the man at the wheel, the man at the ATM, remained a fugitive for a period before he too was eventually brought into custody. The Ministerio Público, the state prosecutorial body, filed formal charges on November 11, 2022. Criminal association and extortion by kidnapping resulting in death. The charge of extortion by kidnapping resulting in death is covered by Article 159, Paragraph 3 of the Brazilian Penal Code. It is one of the most severe charges the code contains. There was a question about jurisdiction. In the popular imagination, cases involving death often belong to the Tribunal do Júri, the jury court that handles intentional homicides. But this case was prosecuted as an extortion crime in which death was the result, not a deliberate homicide in itself. Criminal defense attorney João Paulo Sangion explained the legal distinction to the press. Although death occurred, the primary intent was an attack on the victim's patrimony. That classification kept the case before a single criminal judge rather than a jury, and it was processed under strict judicial secrecy at the Second Criminal Court of Hortolândia. The first major hearing took place on March 9, 2023. Judge Cristiano Rodrigo Gomes de Freitas presided over approximately 4 hours of testimony from 18 witnesses, 13 called by the prosecution, 5 by the defense. The defendants themselves were heard on May 3rd of that year. All 5 denied direct involvement in the torture and death. The defense teams, particularly for Roberto Jefferson, Rebecca, and Rogério, maintained the argument that their clients had been recruited for a minor fraud scheme and had no foreknowledge of a kidnapping or its lethal outcome. Lead investigator Juliana Ricci of the DEI rejected this framing categorically, and the prosecution argued that the convergence of all 5 roles in a single criminal enterprise made shared responsibility unavoidable. In September of 2024, 2 years after Jonas Lucas went out for bread and did not come back, the court delivered its verdicts. 3 of the defendants were sentenced. The sentences ranged from 28 to 30 years in maximum security prison. The law had done what it was designed to do, and then there are the people left behind. Jonas Lucas never married. He had no children. When he died, the inheritance passed to his 2 siblings. The sister who shared his house, the older brother who had lived alongside him through the modest decades and the sudden wealth and the 2 years of new life that ended on a highway shoulder at 4 a.m. Both of them left, not slowly, not with ceremony, but quickly and completely. Neighbors in Jardim Rosolem watched the household dismantle itself. The people who had grown accustomed to seeing Jonas walk to the bakery, who had observed his generosity, who had watched him become something extraordinary while somehow remaining entirely himself. They saw his siblings go. The house emptied. The family vanished into anonymity, into protected addresses, into the kind of invisibility that the living sometimes have to adopt in the aftermath of violence. So Francisco, the old friend who used to go fishing with Jonas at the Chakra, spoke about him with the particular grief of someone mourning a person who had no enemies, who wanted nothing but to fish and share food with the people he loved, who gave away trucks and paid for cancer treatments and walked to the corner bakery every morning because he liked fresh bread and the world had always been safe in that small, familiar radius. It had not been safe. It was never safe. Not after September of 2020 when the lottery numbers came up. The safety Jonas Lucas believed in was a story he told himself. Perhaps the most human kind of story, the one that says the place where we grew up and the people who know us will protect us from the worst of what the world contains. There is a question that lingers over everything in this case, and it is not a comfortable one. The compliance system at Jonas's bank worked. The 3 million real transfer was blocked. The fortunes of the siblings were preserved. In the narrow technical sense, the financial architecture performed exactly as designed. But no one in that bank knew, could have known, that a man was being held somewhere and beaten, that the voice on the WhatsApp message was speaking under direct physical coercion, that blocking the transfer was simultaneously the right institutional decision and a death sentence for its account holder. Lead investigator Ricci and others in the security sector have pointed toward this paradox as an unresolved structural problem. There is no easy answer. A system that can identify anomalous transactions cannot necessarily distinguish between a client who is confused and a client who is being tortured. The technical safeguard and the human catastrophe occupied the same moment, and neither canceled the other. What the case does make clear is that the vulnerability Jonas Lucas faced was not simply a personal failure of judgment. It was the predictable outcome of a larger structural gap. Sudden wealth distributed without any mandatory framework of protection. The lottery made Jonas Lucas rich. No institution, no protocol, no system was designed to then make him safe. He received tens of millions of reais and, with them, a target he did not know how to recognize, in an environment that had no mechanism for recognizing it on his behalf. Jane Ferreira, the local resident who knew him from the neighborhood, had said it plainly. Everyone knew it was dangerous for him to walk around alone with a story so publicly known as having won the lottery. Everyone knew, and still there was nothing. No guidance, no security protocol, no structured transition into a life where that kind of wealth requires a different kind of vigilance. Jonas Lucas chose to stay himself. That choice deserves more compassion than judgment. He was a man who had worked hard for decades, who had a sister and a brother he loved, who had old friends from 1994 he still wanted to build something with, who wanted to pay for a sick friend's medication and give someone a truck and go fishing at the Chakra on weekends. He was trying to hold on to the life he had built, the relationships that had substance, the identity that was genuinely his. He went out on a Tuesday morning in September to buy bread. He was bringing it back for his sister. He was 55 years old. His name was Jonas Lucas Alves Dias. People who loved him called him Luquinha. Remember that.